Psalm 26 was written by David, and it's a psalm of frustration. Frustration in how little control we have over how things end up going in our lives. David talks in a way here that might make us uncomfortable at first. He says a lot of phrases that might make us a little uneasy in our souls, where he says, he's talking to the Lord, and he says, "Lord, I've led a blameless life. I've trusted in you without wavering. Test me, examine my heart and mind. I keep your love before me. I walk continually in your truth. I don't do the wrong things, and I do all the right things." It sounds like he's building himself up in a way that says, I'm not sinful, and there's nothing wrong with me, so you should reward me. But we know that David's not saying that. David, in so many of his psalms, he expresses not only his deep sinfulness, but also his deep sorrow over his sinfulness. So he's not saying here that he's perfect. What he is saying, though, is something that we all feel. That when we do the right thing, when we are walking in the right path, and when we are treating people in good ways, we want to know that that's going to go well for us. That's going to pay off in the end. And that's just not the way it works all the time. David talked about it in one area of life with other people. That just because he was treating them well and David was honoring God and doing the right thing, it didn't mean that everybody was going to respond in good ways. And that can be the case for us too. Just because you are doing a good job being married to someone, it doesn't mean that the other person is going to respond and do a good job of loving you. Just because you do a good job of caring for your children and treating them with love and grace, it doesn't mean that they're always going to respond very well to you. Just because you do your job very well and very faithfully doesn't mean that there isn't going to be somebody else in the office who's going to try to go behind your back or undermine you. Just because you do a good job following the rules on the freeway as you're driving, it doesn't mean that everybody's going to reward you by being nice and polite and how they are driving their vehicle around you. It doesn't always work that way. And sometimes that can be very hard. And people can be incredibly unloving and incredibly harsh, and it hurts. And that's what was happening with David. He didn't have the ability to control how those relationships were going to go or how those people were going to treat him. And that made him very vulnerable. And David applies that to other people, but you can apply it more broadly too to other areas of life. Like you work hard to keep your children safe, for example. You work hard to keep them emotionally safe, physically safe, spiritually safe, but it doesn't guarantee that they're always going to feel that way. Or you work hard to stay healthy. You eat all the right things, you exercise, you follow all the best and greatest advice, but you still might get diagnosed with cancer or some other illness or disease. You can't push the right buttons and get life to turn out just the way that you want to, and it doesn't seem fair and it doesn't seem right. And so David's expressing that frustration. And he gives us a really important key to dealing with that frustration towards the end of the psalm. He appeals to two things, and then he makes a declaration. The second half of verse 11, where he says, "Redeem me and be merciful to me." And both of those phrases give us something very good to remember about the Lord when life is surprising, when it's shaky, when we don't know exactly how things are going to turn out and it makes us feel afraid. First of all, David is remembering that the Lord redeemed you. And the word redeem basically means to pay a price for something, to buy you back from something. And what's the price that God paid for you? It was nothing less than the life of his perfect son, Jesus. That was the price that he paid to bring you into his family. And that's where you are. You're a member of God's own family, with God as your father. However others treat you, however life goes, it doesn't change that. You belong to God because he has redeemed you. And the second phrase, where he says, "Be merciful to me," well, that's something God has already done for you too. To have mercy on someone is to see somebody who's hurting, somebody who is unable to care for themselves in some type of way, and to be moved by that hurt in such a way that you do something about it. Remember Jesus on the cross. Remember Jesus come in flesh. Remember the baby in Bethlehem. Remember everything that he knew was waiting for him. and remember that He has had mercy on you. He has redeemed you. He has had mercy on you. And the declaration that David makes at the end of that psalm because of that, he says, "My feet stand on level ground." Level ground, of course, isn't shaky. It's not uneven. It's not unsafe. You're not vulnerable when you're there. And that's where you always are in the care of God. You're always standing on level ground. Because the outcome of your life doesn't depend on how anyone else treats you. It doesn't depend on whether they have a good or a bad attitude. It doesn't depend on if things go the way that you want them to go or some other way entirely. It depends on whether or not God has redeemed you, and on whether or not God will be merciful to you. And Jesus, of course, is the reminder that He already has. You're standing on level ground. You're in a good place. Rest well tonight, my friends.